you very much for joining me today to talk about the Aura Working Well Together Charter. So this is the second podcast series exploring the Charter, 1 year on from inception, looking at learning so far across the sector in adopting it. And we're going to be hearing from different people, agency side, client side, and sometimes together. So I am Louise McLaren. I'm the UK MD of Lovebrands, a strategic insights agency, and I will be hosting this podcast series. Morag, over to you for an introduction.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Louise. I look forward to sharing a bit of a nightmare scenario of what happens when the Working Well Together Charter doesn't work so well, or wasn't implemented from the start. I'm Morag. I'm a partner at Hummingbird Insights, which is a qualitative agency based in the UK, but we work across the globe.
Brilliant. And I so appreciate the fact that you're going to be taking this honest, radically honest view in this series, because I think quite often, agency side, we try and gloss over the challenges and project an image that we're always running things perfectly and our projects always deliver optimally, smoothly, and deliver exactly the outcomes that our clients need. And of course, the reality is that nothing's ever perfect. We've all had those experiences of projects that have kind of scarred us a little bit. And as I say that, a few pop into my mind. And we can better learn together if we speak openly and honestly, of course, without blame and undue negativity and finger pointing. But this charter exists for a reason. It exists because there's things that in the sector could be better for everybody's well-being, frankly, and for the quality of the work. And I think part of the angle in making the most of it is learning and digging into a bit more about why it exists and what challenges it's looking to solve. So I very much appreciate the candid view that we're going to be getting from you today, Morag. So let's start at the top, because as you've alluded to, we're going to be talking about sort of maybe a worst case scenario project. Is that a polite way of putting it? And what's really interesting in this one is that you can see the red thread from beginning to end as you look across the principles, that aspects of how the project was set up were not completely optimal, and that had a knock-on effect again along the way. So why don't you just talk us through this, Morag, starting with principle 1, which is when we ask you for a proposal, we'll respect your time.
Absolutely. So let me give you a bit of a background to this project, which is now known as the Nightmare Project on the high end. So this project was a competitive pitch. The project was multi-market and multi-stage. So it was a large project. And at the outset, the brief looked clear. We wrote a proposal and we were absolutely delighted because we were the winning agency and were awarded the project. So as a standard, as part of the Hummingbird process, we booked off a project kickoff key call with the core project team. And so we were expecting like 5 people to join, and we had over 20. And what became very clear from this project kickoff call was there was no internal stakeholder management. There was no alignment on the methodology that had been signed off. We had the PO, and the required methodology that had been won was going to have to change. So what became very clear was we were on the back foot before this project even started.
I'd had hazard a guess that would make for a bit of an awkward kickoff meeting and rather a stressful one.
Absolutely. The kickoff was, I did feel, yeah, I felt like I was in an alternative universe. Claire Dance and I afterwards, we all were like, what was that? Because it was confusing because, we had the PO, the methodology was very clear, the different stages were very clear, what we were doing, it had all been signed off. And to then have this absolute whirlwind of a kickoff meeting was, it was quite discombobulating. It was it was very, very disorientating.
I can imagine. So what happened after that? So let's talk about principle number 2 and how that played out on your project, which is we'll commit to open and honest conversations at all times.
Yeah, so we thought after the kickoff meeting, we can do this. We can get everybody aligned and we can, solve this. So what we set up was weekly project meetings, so kind of status meetings because it was multi-stage to bring everyone on the journey. And then we had sharing sessions with the core team. So as the different stages unfolded, they would be kept in the loop as the findings were, emerging. And we thought that by doing this, that this would help improve, internal alignment and ensure that the team were in agreement as the project unfolded. However, unfortunately, these actions did very little to mitigate the challenges both we would face as well as our client would face as the project continued to unfold. So yes, we tried to solve, and we thought that that would work. And what we've realized is when there's no alignment internally, it's very difficult to move everyone together. Very, very tough.
No, there's something really quite fundamentally not working in the setup of the project, isn't there?
Absolutely, and also I do feel for the different stakeholders because they're all in different roles. They all need slightly different things in order to make the various decisions they need in their role. So I did feel for them as well, but it was just really hard not having, just that one point of contact and alignment internally.
Absolutely. So let's talk about then principle three, because the skull clearly kind of flows from one thing to the next. We'll leave you to do your best work by managing our side of things well. So clearly not in terms of alignment and stakeholder management. Talk us through how this principle played out in your project.
Absolutely. And so the 2 points under that principle, which is we'll do our best to give you a single point of contact as key sign-off moments, is the first one. And then we'll ensure stakeholders' expectations are managed. And for both those 2 points that sit beautifully under this principle for this project, they just didn't happen. There was just simply no internal stakeholder management. We did have one point of contact, but and because they were unable to manage their stakeholders, it was really difficult to meet everybody's expectations and also understand what was in each, what each stakeholder wanted. So it just meant, the project findings were going to be stretched in multiple different directions according to the different stakeholders' needs, just which meant the focus of the study and the central question was it was going to unravel, unfortunately.
Yeah, that sounds messy. You can't deliver to a whole bunch of different sets of objectives. That's never going to set a project up for success, right?
Absolutely. And, and it's particularly when you're trying to figure out what a stakeholder wants when you don't really know, and you're trying your best to deliver without all the information. It's really, really tough.
Mm. So that takes us on to principle four. We'll treat you as an extended part of our team, which is a really interesting one because it sounds like there wasn't a very defined team on this project. So then having the structure in place and the sense of relationship dynamics in place for you to then be an extended part of that, not really there, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key points under this principle is we'll give you access to stakeholders and contextual information when appropriate. And this is where we actually uncover the crux of the problem. The research that we were doing had already been commissioned, had been conducted multiple times prior to our study. And although, as standard, if you work with us at Homewood Insights, you will see at the beginning of a project, before we do the kickoff, we will ask for previous studies. We'll ask for any information in the category that will help us because we like to build our knowledge and we're not just replaying what the team already knows. And unfortunately, the previous studies that this team had done, they were this, and although we had asked for this from before the kickoff study, we were only given the information 3/4 of the way through field work. And when we saw the previous reports on the topic, our hearts absolutely sank because we realized the exact study that we were doing had been done multiple times before and recently, that for whatever reason, and we never, I don't know the answer to this, for whatever reason, this team did not accept the these previous researchers' findings. And it also just, made us realize that given the study's previous results were not accepted, and our findings were similar, they too were going to be rejected. So, what we tried to do was we brought in a brand strategist to help us and to help the client, given the complexity that we had uncovered. And I'm not quite sure where the blockage for the internal team was, or why they couldn't, see that they had recommissioned project that they had already the answers to. I just don't know, but that sometimes does happen. And that's why at Hummingbirds we ask to see your previous studies before we do research, because it's important to know what you already know so we can, move everyone forward, because no one wants to just repeat studies. Sometimes, yes, it's necessary, but actually things sometimes don't change that quickly, depending on what you wanted to find out, obviously.
Absolutely. And no one wants to come back with findings that are conversely really conflicting with previous work, and you didn't know what that previous work was. So you weren't prepared to figure out how to help the clients reconcile that.
Absolutely. And it's also just about coming back to, value. We're wanting to give you the best value for your spend. And if you, like in this case, it was a huge financial cost, to the client. And unfortunately, it didn't move them forward because it was the same as the previous studies. And that's a terrible, and then also on our end, it's a massive waste of time, because we want to know, one of the little kicks we get at Telling Good Insights is knowing that we're moving you forward, and this wasn't moving anyone forward. So it was, yeah, really, really challenging.
And that points to something quite sort of shaky in how insight and insight work is perhaps viewed in that team, because the project had been done various times before, and the findings hadn't been accepted or adopted. So there's something that's not quite sort of right there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And had we known that from the get-go, had we had those, that those reports before we started, we could have alerted and just not started with fieldwork and help them unlock what they were trying to get out from the study, and and just walk away earlier. And but because we didn't, you didn't know, and we got it three-quarters of the way of field work, your spend is already there. So, you have to complete things.
Exactly. You can't really course correct at that point.
No.
So at principle 5, or respect your right to disconnect.
Absolutely. And I think one of the points that I love about this charter underneath this principle is when we ask for things, we always tell you when we need it. And we won't ask for a tight turnaround if we don't need one.
Mm.
And what I think about this principle, and I reflect on this project, I think of my poor team, and we were just little hamsters on the wheel, just trying to, keep up with the demands. And the demands for changes to the final debrief were just coming quicker than we could deliver. And what was really, really helpful was having an external person, which was our brand strategist, and they were really good, and they just said, "Stop. You need time to think, and at the moment you're doing yourself a disservice trying to, deliver to these ridiculous timelines." And I think finally saying no just helped us to regroup and realize we had done the best we could, but nothing was going to change the challenge. We'd produced the same results as the previous studies. That wasn't our fault. That just happened. I'm not also blaming the client for that either. It's just these things happen. But it was really, really good just in the power of saying no, and just pushing back, I think helped everyone's sanity a bit, in this dreadful project.
Absolutely. And then the last principle is we'll commit to proper feedback. And I can hazard a guess that that is one where you might have had some challenges too. But I'm guessing you had a really strong need for a sense of sharing with the client what had happened and clearing the air and sort of figuring out with them what went wrong in order to prevent that in the future. Right at the end, did you get that chance?
Well, I think after this project, we all, if you think of like a bunker, we all just wanted to hide. So I think the group that as a team, we went into hiding, as they just we needed to mentally recover what we, what we had been through, because it really was yeah, it was tough on all of us. And what was really, really useful was we were contacted by the head of insights, because we'd worked with this client multiple times before. And we had a really challenging conversation about, what had gone wrong, what had gone wrong from our side, what had gone wrong from their side. But what was useful was it has allowed us to recognize what we need from our clients in order to work well together. So we do have a red flag system in place internally so that because I will not put my team through this. And I think that's the trauma is just not worth it. Where this is what we do. Yes, it's important, but it's not life or death. And this experience was traumatic for my team, and we play a part because we expose them to that. So therefore, as a custodian of the team, we need to be ensure and have things in place that no one goes through this again. So, it is, and I think feedback is really, really important. And I think it is sometimes a miss. I think we've all had, where we've been on proposals and you just get silence and you don't know why you've lost or what's happened. And we do understand, procurement, not blaming procurement at all, but there are times that you need to have multiple proposals. Absolutely fine. But the agency has put time and effort into that proposal. So they do need to know. And even if you're going with your preferred agency or someone that you've worked with, just tell them so that they know. Because radio silence is not helpful.
Not helpful because many of us have a growth mindset and we need to thrive in this sector. So we've got to learn all the time and figure out how to improve all the time. And I think a really important part of this charter fundamentally is opening up those honest conversations to build empathy and understanding on both sides. Because just as you say, proposals can take a lot of work. And quite often a brief will come in into an already busy workload. You might be hitting deadlines, running fieldwork, and you've got to squeeze it in. So to then sort of go above and beyond, maybe sacrifice some personal plans perhaps to get that proposal done, and then to not get any feedback. That can be quite upsetting. Um, and of course, we appreciate both of us the challenges that clients are going through, everything they're juggling, how busy their diaries are, the stresses that can often come with being client side these days, the fact that they make a decision and then they just have to move on. But I think just knowing that you've lost a project, because even that doesn't always happen. Sometimes in the worst case scenario, you don't even find out. You just get ghosted. But knowing you've lost a project and then knowing just a little bit about why is sort of quite fundamental, really, to having any kind of working relationship between client and agency side.
Absolutely. And I think also like what we try to do as standard is after every project, we'll have an internal session to understand how it went for everybody. But we also try and have an external session as well with our clients to understand how it went from their side. But to your point, they've got so much on their plate, they've moved on to the next thing. It's then how do you make sure, and you've actually got to build feedback into find out when is a quieter time for your client, what are their what would work for them, and actually either move that yearly or 6 monthly. But it's just such an important part because it enables you to fix things and just to grow your relationship, which is in everybody's interest, really.
Absolutely. And the most effective client agency relationships will always result in better work for the client and favors and going above and beyond. Um, there's always going to be value gained by the building those relationships because good agencies will recognize that one bird in the hand is worth multiple birds in the bush these days and work really hard to protect and nurture those relationships that they value. And the client's always going to get more out of that as a result.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key point of the charter that as we move into the next year of, working well together is something to actually highlight is the financial benefit to clients by working well with their agencies, because you're absolutely right. They do get more. And and we're very cognizant clients are being pushed with how do you get the most value for your spend? Where do you spend your money? And actually, one of the simplest things you can do is work well with your agencies because you will get more. You will get more value. They'll go the extra mile and it's just, and also favors, those last minute requests will come through at a fraction, at a fraction of the cost, or you might not be charged. So it's just something to think about for the debt clients out there as well.
Yeah, resonates with me. I did a favor for a client just a few days ago that we had to rush to try to figure out a solution to it, and the client was a bit desperate because something had gone a little bit suboptimally in a project she was trying to set up. She was just looking for an immediate solution, and we sort of put everything in motion to get a solution for her really quickly. We wouldn't necessarily do that for a client that didn't have a really positive and productive and friendly working relationship with us. Overall, Morag, if you think about this project, this sort of nightmare project, if there's maybe it's hard to boil this down, but if there's one thing that you would have ideally done differently, knowing now about this charter, is there anything you could point to? Because of course, you were kind of, I think, sort of set up for failure in the fundamentals of how this project was constructed and run on the client side. I don't know how anyone could have succeeded in that context. But is there anything on reflection that you might have done differently, knowing about this charter now and with the way you're using it now, that could have made it a bit less painful?
Well, I think it's the open and honest conversation. So I think that's principle 2. And then also, I think it might be principle 3 or 4, which is, we'll treat you as a member of our team. So we definitely feel more empowered to, it sounds terrible, but escalate. But that's basically it. It's just actually say, this is not going well. And have that difficult conversation. Because I'd rather have that difficult conversation at the beginning of a project and walk away than put my team through what they went through. It's just not worth it. So that's definitely, part of our red flag system is, do we need to speak to somebody? Do we need to speak to somebody else? What do we do? And yes, it's hard in this lumpy financial market to walk away from a project, because obviously that's not, financially in my interest. But at the same time, money's not everything, because the trauma of this, it stays with you. It really, really does. And it took a long time for the team to get back to their normal capacity, because they needed time off to recover.
Yeah. Yeah. So the knock-on effect is really significant.
Mm.
Um, well, I think that kind of really speaks to the overall value of the charter very, very nicely. Thank you. I have really appreciated hearing from your experience and learning from it. And I think we can all learn from failure. This is not your failure, and failure can sound like a really negative word, but there's that great podcast by Elizabeth Day, How to Fail. We all learn more from failure than we often do from successes. And yes, there can be sort of trauma in there from those really awful projects, but we learn a lot from them. And I think good clients will have a respect for an agency that comes along and says, we can see the signals that this is going to go wrong, and we have experienced these kinds of things playing out in a difficult way before, and we want to say to you, stop now. Halt, figure things out, because we don't want this really challenging outcome for you that we've been through in this sort of baptism of fire kind of experience. So I think it can be quite empowering to go through those failures, to then sort of have that confidence to step up and say no in the most constructive way possible. And this charter is just a kind of helpful tool to facilitate that, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's why with this charter, what we do now is we just include it in our proposals. So it's just part of the appendix, so that, setting out like how we like to work. It's just there simply as a reminder. And then for clients that perhaps are not part of Aura, they're able to ask questions or have the links so that they can, see more about it and find out a bit more. But I think it just sets up expectations really nicely across how one likes to work.
That's a great tip for how to start to introduce it. I'm going to start doing that myself. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak openly and honestly, Morag. It's been really helpful to learn from your experience. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.